Hello guitar players, my name is Josh Snodgrass. Today I'm going to show you how to read guitar tab. And specifically today we're going to look at guitar tab that comes in this form, where you see a group of lines in the lower section there that has some numbers on it, and in the upper section we see a staff with musical notes. And sometimes as a guitar player, especially if we don't come from a background where we read music, this can be a little confusing. And so I'm going to help you make sense of it all. Now before we get into it, I want to tell you that on my website you can go download this. It's 6 pages, it has a bunch of great information, it's free. I have a link in the description below where you can go and download that and print it out, where you can look at this and follow along, make notes if you need to. So today, we're going to talk about this guitar tab and sheet music in this form where you see them both, the music over the tab. And I find this form really helpful because the numbers tell you where to put your fingers, and this upper section shows you the rhythm that you need to play. So first of all, let's talk about the lower portion, this group of 6 lines at the bottom of the guitar tab. And this part just shows numbers and sometimes some other symbols, but mostly it's numbers down there. And the way to make sense of this is that when you look at these numbers, the lowest one, like the bottom of those lines, is this low E string right here. It's the deepest note on your guitar. And then the highest, like the top line, that's the highest string, and the other 6 lines there, or all the 6 lines correspond to a string on the guitar. So when you see a number on a line, it is referring to a fret number. So in this example here, we see the classic G chord that most guitar players learn to play when they're first learning to play the guitar. So we see 3, 2, open, 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 and then 3. And so that shows that we put our finger on the 3rd fret, and then the 2nd fret, and then the zeros show that those next 3 strings are open, and then we have the 3rd fret on the bottom string. So that's that G chord, just like that. That seems pretty simple, right? So this next example here shows a chord with a X. So we're looking at a C chord here, but it has an X on the top string because we typically don't play that open E when we play a C chord. And oftentimes I'll mute it either with my thumb or the flesh of my finger, and so the X shows a muted string. You don't want that one to ring out. There are a few expressive things we do on the guitar that show up in guitar tab. The first example here is hammer-ons and pull-offs. And you'll notice there that there's an H and a P. So the H is short for hammer-on and the P is short for pull-off. And so this would be played like this. We've got the 2nd fret hammering onto the 3rd fret like that. And then the 2nd fret pulling off to the open string. So that's pretty simple. And then we also have bent strings on the guitar. And I don't do a lot of string bending myself, but it is pretty common in guitar tab, and so I'll show you this. And that's where we have this arrow that bends up, and it bends up and it'll say half or full usually. So full is when we bend up a full step or a full tone depending on where you're at. We call it different things. But when there's a little half above the arrow there, that would show you're going to go up a half tone or half step. So a full tone, that'd be going up the equivalent of 2 frets. So in this example here, we're going from that 3, and we're trying to bend this note all the way up to there. So we're going to go like this. It's hard to do an acoustic guitar. And so if we're going to go up half, it'd be like 1 fret's worth. So like that. Also, this next example is what's called a natural harmonic. That's where you just lightly touch the string over the 12th fret, and you pick, and you end up with that chimey kind of sound. This can also be done on the 7th fret or the 5th fret. They get harder as you go up the neck. You can even get them maybe on the 4th fret on the deeper strings. But when we have a natural harmonic, you see that's kind of bracketed there. That's how those are notated. Now one thing I should mention that shows up in my guitar tab, you may not see other places, is that sometimes you'll have a -2 on that low E string, as you see in this little diagram here. And so that shows, basically that shows I'm using a drop D capo. I love using a drop D capo, use them all the time almost. Probably 95% of the time I'm playing with the drop D capo. I just find that they make fingerstyle guitars so much easier. And so what that is, that's a capo that covers all but the top string. And so you put that on to where it covers these 5 strings and leaves the top string open, and then you can play like a D chord and have that low bass. It's just awesome. I love it. And I actually have a video where I describe how I use that and why I think it's so great. And I'll put a link to that video in the description down below, and you can go and watch that if you have any interest in that. But if you're looking at my guitar tab, the chances are you're going to see a -2 on that low E string, and that is what that's referring to. It's just 2 frets below the capo. So that's everything I'm going to tell you about the lower portion of the guitar tab. But now we're going to look at the upper portion, which is the notes on a staff. And in this first example here, we see kind of this big curly thing followed by 2 numbers. Now that big symbol is the treble clef. You don't need to worry about what that is right now, but you do need to know what those 2 numbers are that are next to it. And that's showing the time signature. The top number is how many beats per measure, and the lower number is what kind of beats are we talking about. And so in this case, where you see a 4/4, it would be 4 quarter notes. If you had a 6/8, it would be 6 eighth notes. So that's pretty easy. Then we have here 4 quarter notes. And so you can tell a quarter note because it is like a little circle shaded in with a stem on it. And that shows that is equivalent to 1 beat. So in this case, each quarter note would be counted like 1, 2, 3, 4. So we would play this. You see we have our finger on the 3rd fret there. You can tell from the lower tab portion. The rhythm is saying 1, 2, 3, 4, that we have 4 equal notes being played out. Now wouldn't it be easy if everything was quarter notes, but music would sound kind of boring. So we have notes with other durations, other rhythms. When we have a circle with a stem on it, that is a half note, and a half note is equal to 2 quarter notes. It makes sense if you know your fractions, right? So the way this next little measure would be played would be like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. So each of those half notes is worth 2 beats. Now, the next example shows a whole note, and this one takes up the whole measure. And I should mention that measures are divided by vertical lines in the music, and you'll see those. But the whole note takes up 4 beats. So in this case, we would play that like this: 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. The whole note takes up all 4 beats. In this next example, we have an 8th note. And you can tell that because it's the black circle with the vertical stem, and then it's got a little flag coming off of it, just 1 flag. And that's an 8th note, and so these start getting to be a little tricky to count, but I'm going to give you the way that I do it. I count 1 and 2 and so each beat, when I start getting into 8th notes, dividing these beats, then instead of just like 1, 2, 3, 4, I count 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now if we had a series of 8th notes, it would be like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So you see those can start to get a little bit quick. We also have 16th notes and 32nd notes. It keeps going down and down. And the 16th notes and the 32nd notes, they look like the 8th note, except they just each one has an extra stem. So the 16th note, an extra flag. So the 16th note has 2 flags. And when I'm counting 16th notes, I break it down further with the way I'm counting. I count 1E and a 2E and a, so if the beat was like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a, like that. So 16th notes would be played 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a. One thing I should mention about these 8th notes and the 16th notes is that sometimes we end up with groups of them, and it can be kind of confusing if we just had lots of 16th notes dropped in there. It would be hard to tell where the beats are. And so the system that they came up with was, instead of connecting them all with the little dot with the stem and them all having their separate flags, was to group them by beat, where you've got maybe 2 8th notes connected by a bar, or 4 16th notes connected by a bar, and you can see that in that example there. And so the way this example would play would be, again, we're here on our 3rd fret playing this D note. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3E and a 4E and a, because we have 4 8th notes followed by 8 16th notes. And sometimes the 8th notes and the 16th notes get mixed together, like in the next example. And so in this case, we have 1 8th note followed by 2 16th notes, and that would be played like this: 1, 2, 1 and a. So 1 and a, that kind of sounds like the 1 and a 2 and a. That comes from this system. Here we have an example of actual fingerstyle guitar music. And you notice that we are in 3/4 time here, so we're going to be counting the beats 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. In this example, some of the stems are pointed down and some are pointed up. And that shows us that the numbers with the stems pointed down, that's one rhythmic group, typically played with a thumb or thumb pick, or in my case I play with a flat pick that I hold with my thumb and pointer finger, and then I pick with these fingers down here. But most people will play with their thumb or whatever, thumb pick. And so those numbers, those notes with the stems pointed down, those would be played with the thumb. And then the notes with the stems pointed up would be played with the fingers. And so the way that this measure would sound would be, it would sound like this. So I'm going to play it a couple times. 1 and 2, 3, 1 and 2, 3. Now we're not always playing notes, are we? Sometimes we're doing resting, right? There's time in between notes. We can call those rests. The way those are notated in music is like this. You see there in the first measure that we have a shaded in rectangle hanging down from a line. Now that's a whole rest. And I had someone just give me a trick to remember the whole rest because they hang below the line because they're full. They take up the full measure, and so they're full, so they hang down because they're heavy. The next one, where we have the black rectangle shaded in, it's a half measure, and it is above the line because it's only half full. It only takes up 2 beats. And then we have a symbol there that looks kind of like, almost like a bird, maybe drawn in calligraphy, or kind of a squiggly line there, and that is a quarter rest. So that's the same as a quarter note, but it's a rest. And then those next 2 examples there are, those next 2 symbols are an 8th rest and a 16th and 2 16th rests. And you can tell because they've got, the one has the one dot with a little line connecting, the other one has 2, just like the 16th notes or the 8th notes have 1 flag or 2 flags, those correspond, so that helps us to remember that. Now there's a few other things to talk about when it comes to note duration. Not every note lasts a quarter or an 8th or a 16th or a half. There's notes that last, let's say, 3/8, right? Start talking about our fractions here. And those can get kind of tricky. And so the way that, there's a couple of things that we do to notate those. The first one is called a dotted note. And so when you see a note with a dot next to it like that, that is, basically that little dot means times 1.5. So if a quarter note with a dot next to it, that's actually worth 3/8 notes. If you have a half note with a dot, you would take the half times 1.5, and that equals 3/4. That makes it a 3/4 note, right? So you can have a dotted 8th note, whatever. It just makes it time and a half. Another thing that we use in music to relate to note duration is a tie, and this a lot of times it happens at the end of a measure where you've got maybe one note, it carries over that measure line into the next measure. In this example here, we have a half note, and then a quarter note, and then we've got 1/4 note with a tie to the next measure, where that next quarter note is tied to it. So this is the equivalent of a half note, these 2 quarter notes tied together. It's like they're the same note, but since they cross over, they just kind of use that little symbol to tie them together. So here's how these 2 measures would be played. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So next we need to talk about triplets. Triplets are when you have 3 notes that will take up the space of a quarter note or half note or whatever. And so we're breaking it down into 3, and so it doesn't fit into our little system of quarter notes and 8th notes very well. So what we've done is we notate it like this, where you've got 3/8 notes with the little tie with the 3 there, and that shows that this is going to be a triplet. So these 3/8 notes would become the equivalent of, they take up the time of 2/8 notes. So this is basically 1/4 note here with these 3 triplet 8th notes. And so if we're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, triplet 2, that's the way it would work. And so when I'm counting triplets, I use that triplet, 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 and that will help. All right, well I think that's everything I wanted to cover, but I did want to tell you a few more things. One is I just want to give you a word of encouragement. When you try to learn to play fingerstyle guitar songs, reading tab, or even listening, or however you're going to learn it, fingerstyle guitar can be really challenging if you're not used to it. I still find it challenging, and I play fingerstyle guitar all the time. So fingerstyle guitar is just kind of complex. Now, A lot of the songs that I play are relatively simple for fingerstyle guitar, a lot of the songs that I've arranged, and I try to keep them that way as much as I can. But you know, there may be times when you're looking at my music or someone else's music and it just seems overwhelming or it seems difficult. I would recommend approaching it slowly. You know, when I'm trying to learn some really difficult song, what I'll do is I'll learn one measure at a time. You know, I'll just look at it and I'll break it down and try to understand the rhythm, and then I will, you know, very slowly play through the notes and try to pick it all just with accurate rhythm, but just very slowly. And I'll kind of build up my speed over time as my muscle memory increases. But I'll just do it. In one day, I might just learn one measure. And I might need to continue practicing that measure. Maybe the next day I'll learn to play the next measure. And so, you know, it can be time consuming, but I promise you, if you stick with it, you'll learn those measures faster and faster and faster as you go along. And in time, things that you once felt like were impossible to play now will seem much easier to you. So just stick with it, keep working on it, and you'll get it. Another thing I want to share with you is that I have at my website Guitar Tab for many popular hymns, and I'm about to release, and by the time you see this it may have already been out, but I'm about to release a book with a bunch of Christmas songs in Guitar Tab, a bunch of Christmas carols, most of them just played very simply, where even if you're new to fingerstyle guitar, they'd be a great place to start. You know, I use mostly very simple chords, and so you might enjoy working on those. But yeah, thanks for taking the time to watch this video, and please subscribe. Also, I have an email list at my website where I send out lessons like this and Guitar Tab notifications and just different things that you won't even get here on the YouTube channel. So make sure you go sign up. The link is in the description below. So thank you so much, and God bless all of you. Have a great day. Bye.